In this video, we're going to go over a chess game where we are a chess beginner and we are playing with the black pieces here. And you have just learned a few opening principles, such as the importance of controlling the center, the importance of developing pieces, doing it quickly, so on and so forth. And so you decided to give a game a try. And so you call a friend over and you play a very friendly game. They open with d4, stating their claim in the center, and you decide to go knight f6. You're still fighting for the center. We don't need to push a pawn right away. And so your opponent decides to support this pawn. You respond, as you should, by playing d5, making your own claim in the center. Your opponent pushes the pawn forward, b4. Now you know that your opponent is not developing a piece, so you know time is very precious, and you go bishop f5. All is good. You are still following the principal moves. Nothing too crazy is happening so far. So your opponent says, I want to move this guy somewhere. Do I develop him here? Nah, I'll go here. But he's developed a piece, no big deal. And you decide, this bishop would like to see the light of day. And so you decide to go e6. Notice you are eyeing down this pawn. Your opponent takes no serious precaution at this, and he goes f3, thinking, I may be able to push e4 later, attacking your bishop. But you notice that this pawn is hanging, and that you also want to develop your bishop so that you may one day castle. And so you strike first blood. You take this pawn with check. Your opponent panics for a bit, but then he says, I'll go king e2, because notice he cannot block with the bishop, or you would chop this knight off, and we cannot have that. So he moves his king out of the way. Big deal. And you decide it's time now for me to expand in the center further. And so you play c5. It's guarded by this bishop. I can develop my knight to a very good square, so why not? Your opponent thinks for a minute, and he decides he really likes all of his pawns here. So I'll ignore what you're doing right now. And he decides, I would like to go bishop to b2. I'm like, sure. I'm sort of eyeing down this pawn. You attack it, I defend it. Nothing should be wrong here. And you decide, yeah, that's fine. Let me just attack it again. Knight c6. Notice that you have developed 4 pieces. Your opponent has developed 2. Maybe we'll see how this one goes. And so after you played this, your opponent decides this bishop isn't seeing very much, so let me just move this king out of the way. All is fine and dandy. And so after a while, you're tired of this pawn doing nothing. And so you strike again. You now have 2 pawns. Surely your opponent will take back with something, right? Nah. Now that I've gotten this bishop to see greener pastures, let's develop here. I'm attacking your knight. Your knight cannot take this pawn if I ever take it back. So, what should be the problem here? Remember that all your pieces have been developed. And so, you decide, no, I want to take another pawn. D takes E3 with check. Your opponent decides, okay, fair is fair. Let me just take that back. You are now up 2 pawns in material, which is good. You have won some material while simply developing your pieces and fighting for the center. And because your opponent is so severely underdeveloped and so exposed, you decided to rip open the center and just go all out. And so, with his king on a dark square, you decide it's time to bring in your most powerful piece, Queen B6 check. Your opponent decides to go King F4. You know, the king decides that he wants to maybe negotiate peace with your king. Maybe that's why he's hoping to walk all the way over here. You, of course, know that this is just nonsense. And you say, no. I will check your king again. Notice here, the bishop and the knight are both attacking the square. So if your opponent blocked with this bishop, there is 1 defender versus 2 attackers. So you could actually chop this bishop off, and the king has nowhere to go. So instead, your opponent, understanding his days are a little numbered, decides to go king to G5. And you pause for a minute, and you realize to yourself how deeply you've lured your opponent's king from E1 all the way to your territory on this side of the board. And you decide to yourself, this cannot be good for black. As so many of these squares are covered, this bishop cannot be taken. So why not just throw in another check? All is fine and fair. You play Queen E3 check. Your opponent goes King H4. And it was in this position you won the game. See if you can find the checkmate in one move that sends your opponent home. Notice that the bishop is eyeing down these crucial squares. This bishop is eyeing down these 2 squares. The knight has this covered. So if only we had a piece that could hit both of these squares at the same time. And upon realizing this, you play the very modest Queen H6. Checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. How did we get here? You simply followed your chess principles. You fought for the center. You developed your pieces. And every piece that you developed played some role in defeating your opponent's king. So, well done.